If you spend any time out in East Portland, you might notice how the whole city starts to feel different. The street grid changes, there are fewer parks, and a lot of areas don't even have sidewalks. But it's not just the lack of city infrastructure. East Portland residents also feel underrepresented by city government. But all that's about to change in a month when city council members dedicated to representing East Portland's interests are finally elected. So, does this mean that sidewalks and other city amenities are also finally coming to these outer neighborhoods? What if I told you that people in power have been trying to get sidewalks in East Portland for decades, and it's been close to impossible? Will our new city government fare any better? So today on CityCast Portland, we're talking with one of the city's experts on East Portland, Randy Leonard. If his name sounds familiar, it's because he's a former state legislator and Portland City Commissioner who's lived in East Portland from the 80s until not that long ago. Randy is here to talk about the history of that area, the political consequences that led to its lack of infrastructure, and how those issues might come into play in the coming election. It's Thursday, October 3rd. I'm Claudia Meza, and this is what Portland's talking about. I think a lot of people might not realize how recently the East Side actually officially became part of Portland. What was that area like when you were growing up in Northeast Portland back in the 60s and 70s? Did you hear much about it back then?
Well, growing up, I went to Irvington Grade School, Grant High School, so I grew up in inner Northeast Portland on 8th and Siskiyou, right next to Irving Park. So I thought, up through probably my sophomore year, the
Mm-hmm.
whole world had sidewalks, a tennis court next door, a park, a swimming pool at their high school. And it wasn't until later, when I got to be probably 16 and got my first car, that I ventured really east of the traditional boundaries of Portland, which back then were Northeast 42nd Avenue in the Grant neighborhood. And then it just kind of zigzagged out to 72nd, heading south, and then out to 92nd, all the way to the Clackamas County border. And then when you got out into what was, I understood later to be unincorporated Multnomah County, it was called Mid County back then,
Hmm.
uh, there was a hodgepodge of houses that weren't necessarily aesthetically built. As I understood later, that was due to really the planners from Multnomah County not requiring streets, not requiring design standards, not requiring setbacks, not requiring the kinds of things that you assume all communities would have when built. And
Right.
Portland certainly did. So it was an area that was definitely cheaper to buy a house in, and people lived there because of that.
Mm-hmm.
But then you had to have gravel roads to your street, no sidewalks, not a lot of services, including parks.
Yeah. Well, you moved to East Portland in the mid 80s, which was also the time those areas were beginning to become a part of Portland. Do you remember why those annexations took place?
Yes, sewers.
Oh, because
The
that area needed sewer to tap into the sewer system, or?
Yeah, when that area was designed, not only did they have or lack design standards for the houses, lacked streets, there was no requirement to have a sewer installed. And because there was no sewer, there was no treating plant. So every house, in fact, there were 150 some thousand structures that operated solely with either cisterns or some other type of sewage management system on the property itself.
Oh, wow.
So you had this huge, vast area. Once Portland annexed that area, it was the largest incorporated area in the United States without sewers.
Whoa.
And the problem was that when the sewage went out into a drain field or into a cistern, it started to percolate down into the groundwater beneath all of these residences and started
Mm,
contaminating the groundwater that is a huge aquafilter
mm-hmm.
that serves parts of Portland and most of Vancouver.
Oh, man.
So, but it was an expensive undertaking to have to actually tackle the problem of how do you install sewers for this 150,000 plus structures that doesn't have sewers.
Mm-hmm. I'm overwhelmed just thinking about that. Well, so were people happy about it? I'm imagining there's the East Portlanders and then there's the, inner Portlanders. Was it a decision that both sides were content with, or was there any animosity about it?
People in the traditional boundaries of Portland were largely unaware that this was an issue.
Oh, wow.
Even when it became a huge issue for the people that were annexed, the people in mid-Multnomah County may have thought sewers were a great idea until they realized they had to pay a large portion of the installation fee. So for people who live there, a single family residence might pay $5,000 to $10,000 based on the square footage of their property for their share of the cost of installing sewers. So it
Mm-hmm.
created not just resentment, but outrage to the extent that there were a group of citizens that lived out there in the early 80s that wanted to create a new city. And the city would have been called Columbia Ridge.
Mm-hmm.
And it would have been a city that existed between those eastern boundaries between Portland and mid-Multnomah County I described earlier, and all the way out to Troutdale.
So in this city that they were building, they would just have no sewers and they would just freely poop into the soil. Is that like, I don't understand like what their thinking was. They were just like, oh, we don't want to pay to go into sewer treatments. We're going to start a new city where we don't have to do that. Was that their thinking?
So you could take what you just said, and that's probably the easy way to describe what the Supreme Court of Oregon said. Um,
Maybe I should be a judge. Just
you
a
should,
lot
and you
of
could say,
audacity.
"Hey, there's no pooping in the dirt around here, people,"
Oh my
and sign
God.
your name, and then that's the order. But that was largely the issue. The people that lived in mid-Multnomah County did not want to have. It wasn't so much they didn't want to have the sewers; they just didn't want to pay for it.
Yeah.
And the city of Portland, the reason it really fell was the city of Portland was doing annexations around that geographic area and annexed a huge industrial section of land out by the airport that would have been largely the tax base of this new city. And once the city of Portland annexed it, the ability for this city to exist beyond just nobody wanting there to be poop in the water,
Hmm.
the tax base evaporated. So the idea went away. But the feelings became even angrier because they
Mm.
felt like the leaders in mid-Multnomah County felt like they had been boxed in by the city of Portland. And in some ways, they were right. They had been.
Yeah. All right, well, let's take a quick break here, and when we return, the reasons why East Portland still doesn't have sidewalks. If you're a home DIYer like me, you might have some leftover paint gathering dust in your basement, but I'm happy to share that Paint Care has 3 simple rules for painting smarter, reducing waste, and helping you get back some of that much-needed storage space. First, buy the right amount of paint for the job. Paint Care has 6 questions to ask yourself when buying paint that can help ensure you have enough while minimizing waste. Second, you use up what's left. Before you break out the paintbrush and tape, see if you have any leftover paint that can save you a trip to the store. Paint Care's website also offers helpful tips for storing paint properly so it lasts for years. And third, if you still have paint, stain, or varnish left over, Paint Care makes it easy to recycle it with convenient drop-off locations as close as your local hardware store. And you can go learn more at paintcare.org/3simplerules. Hey, before we jump back into the interview, I wanted to remind our listeners that this week is our fall membership campaign. We love making the show every day, but we really couldn't do it without you. Our listeners are the very reason we created CityCast Portland in the first place, so please consider becoming a member today and supporting our work directly. Members of CityCast Portland enjoy exclusive perks like ad-free listening and weekly event listings earlier in the week, but you also just get to be a part of local journalism as it's happening. Go to membership.citycast.fm and join today. That's membership.citycast.fm. And if you're already a member, thank you. We really could not do this work without you. Okay, back to our interview with former state senator, state representative, Portland City Commissioner, and inventor of the Portland Loo, Randy Leonard. Well, I want to talk about the problems these incorporations caused by just focusing on sidewalks. And the reason is that is the visual representation for so many people when they think about, the older boundaries of Portland and East Portland. They're just like, where are the sidewalks? And before we jump in, I just wanted to read a listener's note. And he wrote, "My family and I moved to Portland from Corvallis in 2017. We found an affordable home in the Russell neighborhood," which I just looked, and it's like north of Hazel Park or something like that.
Yeah.
I was surprised by the stark contrast between Portland East and West of I 205 in terms of design, lack of infrastructure. You've all covered some of the unpaved street stories and touched upon some of the topics above. What older neighbors have told us is that the Russell neighborhood was incorporated in the mid 1980s. This is what I want to ask you, with promises of sidewalks and improved infrastructure. Then I learned about the city of Maywood Park versus I 205 story, and it made me want to learn more about the development history out here and why these commitments from city government, if they were made, were never fulfilled. Does any of this ring a bell to you? Do you know what he's talking about?
I do. And he actually puts his finger on the angst that exists with the current generation of residents out there versus the traditional city of Portland. To better understand why that phenomena exists in East Portland, you have to go back really to the origins of Portland. When Portland first started developing in the early 1900s, I mean, it had existed since 1851, but really with a kind of a hodgepodge of building, a lack of building codes. And we had a couple of huge fires in the 1870s that destroyed much of the core of the city.
Mm,
So, as much as planners at the Bureau of Planning are maligned,
mhm,
for creating red tape is what people like to use. The truth is that they have enforced design standards and amenities in the traditional city that don't exist outside the city. So sidewalks, paved streets, parks, neighborhoods that are connected to one another. A system that's designed around making it easy to get into downtown Portland. And again, I'm talking about 1900, 1910, 1920s. And Portland developed a streetcar system. So people in the traditional part of Portland could hop on a streetcar in any neighborhood in Portland and get downtown and get back
wow.
home on the streetcar.
Mhm,
But once you left those boundaries that I described earlier out into East Portland, none of that existed. In fact, it was mostly rural farmland. So fast forward to World War II. The vets came home, had money in their pocket, and couldn't afford a lot of the houses in traditional Portland. So developers saw this opportunity and started in this unincorporated area we now call East Portland. They started developing tracts of housing, but they're traditionally 1 story, 1,200 square foot houses, what we call ranch style houses, cheaply built, quickly built. And when they went to Multnomah County, who oversaw the building permits, they weren't required, as they would have been in Portland, to install a sewer, which saved them thousands of dollars in construction costs. They weren't required to pave a street, which saved them thousands of dollars. When you bought a house in Portland, traditional Portland, a brand new house, when you pull up for the first time to look at that house, say the people that bought my parents' house in 1925, they were given a price for the house. What they didn't know is that price included the cost of the sidewalks, the cost of the streets, all those things that the
mhm.
developers had to build. In East Portland, none of those costs existed. So people were able to buy cheap houses. And nobody thought about walkable neighborhoods because cars were now ubiquitous. And so everybody had a car, and planners in Multnomah County designed that community around the premise that people could drive anywhere they needed to go. So they built these cheap houses with no amenities that people gobbled up, including my own sister in the late 50s bought a house out in that newly developed area. And they had a brand new house in a neighborhood of brand new houses. But, we'd go out there and I was a little kid and I was struck then, but no sidewalks. Some of the streets were gravel. And certainly no parks.
Mhm.
So fast forward to the your listener's question. He buys in there and goes, "What in the hell is going on around here?"
Yeah.
Well, he inherited this kind of political dilemma when he bought that house. The solution is like the sewer system. It costs money. And the angst has been over the years, including the years I was on the city council, and I spent also almost 10 years in the Oregon legislature. The solution exists, but the problem becomes who pays for it. And people out there are saying, well, the city should install them like they did in the neighborhoods in Portland. The problem is the neighborhoods in Portland that had them installed, the city didn't pay for them. As
It
I
was the
said earlier,
developers.
the
Yeah.
developers had to pay for it when they built the house. So you have kind of this logger jam, and that's why nothing gets done. And I have felt for a long time that the solution needs to be that the city needs to take a lead and get over the history of how original Portland was developed and come up with a plan. And
Hmm.
maybe even like a long term plan, like the sewer project was. But lobby the federal government for some urban renewal assistance, lobby the Oregon legislature for some urban renewal assistance, and make a plan to not only start paving all the streets in East Portland, but to install sidewalks as well
Yeah. Here,
and
Randy.
parks.
And parks for sure.
Yeah,
Just working on that walkability. I'm imagining that people go out there and it is cheaper, but I don't think it's that much cheaper. You know what I'm saying? So I'm sure
I
they're just
know.
like, wait, I could have bought, a smaller house, a less desirable house in a neighborhood that has already bought into all this infrastructure. But I'm essentially paying almost the same thing. And I have so much less, and I'm paying city taxes, and I'm paying this. And yeah, so I can totally see that frustration.
That's true for a single person or even a couple. But if you have kids, and you need room in the house not to go crazy
Hmm.
with you and your kids and then the dog and then all the attendant things that occur when you have children. It's not really a viable solution to get a small house in the traditional city. You
Definitely.
need to have a yard, you need to have some room in the house for people to have their own space. And East Portland still provides that at a cheaper price than in the inner city.
Hmm.
And but I think that, like I said, I think this kind of political stalemate that has existed since at least the 80s needs to be broken by the leaders in the city. And a solution needs to be developed that funds a long term plan to address all of those inadequacies of East Portland so that people should be able to not only enjoy inexpensive housing, but along with that, have streets and sidewalks and parks and all the amenities traditional Portlanders have always had.
Right. Well, how has the conversation about whether these residents are being represented by city government changed over the past few decades, you think?
Well, the conversation changed when the sewer mandate happened.
Hmm.
And the city annexed those areas of East Portland and said, welcome to the city, and we're going to install sewers. And your share of the bill is going to be anywhere from five to $10,000, or even if you owned a business, God help you, it was even more because it was based on square footage of your property. And a
Hmm.
business with a large square footage paid a whole lot more than $5,000 or $10,000. So from then till now, it's kind of turned into one of these blame games. And really, that dynamic hasn't changed from then till now. When I was on the city council, we would have hearings on what were called local improvement districts. And that's a tool that the city uses to pave unpaved streets and to install sidewalks. But the members of that local improvement district, so say a neighborhood, and maybe even one long block of a neighborhood, they would go to the city and say, we're tired of potholes, we're tired of gravel on our streets, and we're tired of not having sidewalks. And the city would say, great, we can build them for you. But you have to form a local improvement district and you divide the total cost of that amongst each property owner. People are like, whoa, how much is that? 20, 30,000, 40,000, maybe $50,000, their share
Yeah.
of that installing that. So for many people who live out there, that's not a workable solution because the reason they live there is because they can't afford to pay all that money. So we really need to tackle how these are paid for. And asking the residents to pay the whole cost isn't going to cut it because that means it's just not going to get done.
Yeah. Well, we're about to launch a new city government where the East Side will have dedicated city commissioners for the first time in its history. But you actually tried to make that happen when you were in the state senate back in the 90s. What was your
Yes.
idea? Like, how was it different?
What we did was basically have the same boundaries of the four districts that currently exist in the charter amendment, but only one person represented each of those districts, which I
Gotcha.
still think is a superior system to the one that was implemented.
Why
But
is that? I just want to know why you think one is better than three.
well, I just have a hard time getting my arm around the idea that if you win 25% of the vote, which is what the third place person in each district would get, you're going to get a highly qualified member of the council. And I'm not real sure that there's any place that exists in the country where second and third place contestants win.
I don't know. We've had some presidents who've won that I'm confused about.
And there you go. There you go. See what we got? You see what happened when we got a second place president? Didn't work too well. There was a reason he got second place. But the dynamic in Portland was so dysfunctional when this ballot measure came up. And remember, 7 times before, people had rejected amending the city charter to change the way the council was comprised
Hmm.
and how the city worked 7 times. But this time it passed overwhelmingly because people were so pissed off at the status quo of the city. They would have voted for anything
Mm.
to change the form of government because I think most people thought anything's got to be better than what exists now. So
Hmm.
they voted for it.
Well, is there anything about how things are changing that you do like? That you're like, this is better than maybe what you conceived?
Um, no, I, 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 I have to say that when I was on the council, I was there a little over 10 years. If somebody had a problem with the Water Bureau shutting off their water, for an example, and this is a real live example that happened in a heat wave in, I think it was of 2006. A woman called who had her water cut off for lack of payment,
Hmm.
and it was nearing 100 degrees outside. She had a baby and then a small infant and was a single working mom. And she called me because somebody said, well, there's this guy, Randy Leonard, that's in charge of the Water Bureau. Call him and see if he can help you. Because when she called the Water Bureau, they said, pay your bill or you don't get your water turned on.
Right.
So I talked to her and I was just outraged. I thought, okay, yeah, you have to pay your bill. But the first reaction shouldn't be shutting off this working woman's water and cutting off an essential life saving source of water during a heat wave. So I
Right.
called the Water Bureau and said, I don't know what the reasons are, and we'll sort it because this was after 5 o'clock when I did this.
Hmm.
I don't know what the reasons are, but send an emergency crew out there right now, cut the lock off her water main, and turn it on and we'll sort it out later. And you can sit down with her, work out a payment plan, whatever you want to do. But we're not turning people's water off in a heat wave. I promise you that won't happen in the current form of government, where the top person you talk to get your water turned off during a heat wave is a bureaucrat. They are just not going to do that. They're going to say, sorry, you were warned, your water's turned off. As soon as you start paying your bill, we'll turn it back on. So those are the kinds of things that the current charter allows a commissioner to do, to overrule an intractable bureaucracy when stupid things happen. And we see things like that in the paper. So I think you've lost that kind of personal connection with an elected city official to your everyday services by creating this charter change. And the other thing is 12 people is just too many people. I've served in the legislature, in the House, and the Senate. There are 60 people in the Oregon House of Representatives. There are 30 people in the Oregon Senate. And that's like herding cats at times to try to get anything done. And I'm afraid that the total number of people is not going to help resolve livability issues for Portland on a day to day basis. So, and as I said earlier, I'm scratching my head over how a third place person is actually going to be a sitting member of the council. It just doesn't make sense to me. And I think it would have been better to divide the city into quadrants and have one person represent each of those 4 areas. And then if people wanted to tweak it beyond that in future years, fine. But
Hmm.
I think we threw the baby out with the bathwater.
Mm. Well, what do you think the new city's biggest priorities should be for East Portland?
I think the very reason we're having this conversation, I
Yeah.
think what would prove me wrong, and I'd like to be wrong about my assessment of this upcoming charter change,
Hmm.
is if they got together and said, you know what, we don't care what the history of having sidewalks installed in the city of Portland were. We're going to figure out a way to pay for it. We're going to figure out a way to cooperate with the residents out there and get this done. I would
Hmm.
just rejoice. That would be an excellent message to send to the
Yeah.
entire city.
And what if it was that third place winner that really brought it home, Randy?
Well, again,
Wouldn't that be
I,
amazing?
I'm no procrastinator of the future.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that I'm wrong. I would like to
Yeah.
see that I'm wrong. But I just think about all of the second place and third place finishers that I'm aware of over the history of my being involved in politics in Portland. And I wouldn't necessarily want them to be in office. And there was a reason voters said, well, you know what? Thanks a lot, but we're going to go with the number one person.
Hmm. Well, Randy, thank you so much for hanging out with me and going through a question that I swear has been brought up so many times by our listeners and by ourselves, and we just don't really understand what's going on. And this was really, really helpful Also, just thank you for all of your civic work throughout the years. It's so nice to hear that people have been trying to, I mean, it's nice and also not nice to hear that people have been trying to solve this problem for this long. Like there is a bit where you're just like, you feel a kinship with,
prior generations.
Yeah, civic leaders of the past.
Right.
But then also kind of sad that you're like, and still nothing's changed. Oh, okay.
That's right. Yeah. Well, it's been nice talking to you.
And now for some events happening this week. Every Thursday on the show, we like to bring you a few recommendations to help you plan your weekend. And here's what we got. Today is Free First Thursday at Portland Art Museum, meaning from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m., you get in free to all the exhibits at PAM. And right now, in addition to their world-class art collection, you can also see Paul McCartney's personal photo collection taken during the height of Beatlemania. Also, this Friday is the start of the H.P. Lovecraft Film Festival at Hollywood Theater. Going through Sunday, all 3 screens of the theater are taken over by a curated list of creepy and strange films. There will also be special guests and live readings. This festival is in its 29th year. If you haven't gone, it's a true Portland tradition. Also, just to note that we are getting close to the final games of Portland Thorns legend Christine Sinclair, who will be retiring after 11 years with the team. Sinclair will be leaving the team as the leading scorer in international soccer history. You can watch her and the rest of our Thorns play this Saturday against Utah Royal at 7 p.m. over at Providence Park. For even more local news and events, sign up for our daily newsletter, Hey Portland, or check out our website, portland.citycast.fm. And just a reminder that if you become a CityCast Portland member, you'll get our freshly handpicked weekly events before anyone else at the very top of the week. To become a member, sign up at membership.citycast.fm. We'll throw all links in the show notes. Well, that's all for today here on CityCast Portland. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more from around the city. Until then, see you at Slim's.